So this is video 3 of week 4. Let's just go already into the schedule of language acquisition. I have prepared here a little table for you, and let's just take a look at it. It's pretty much self-explanatory, and it's just a complement to the reading that you have. So first you have in the first column the age of the child, and then what the child is able to recognize as for linguistic objects, or linguistic data, and what the child is able to produce at that particular age. So we see already that at 1 month of age, which is very early, and that's a very small baby, the child, if you look at what they produce, we know that they can produce involuntary crying in response to feelings that they have from their body or their mind. And they also, though, at 1 month, they start expressing feelings of pleasure or discomfort by cooing and gurgling. So they go, but not much more, which is hardly something that we think of linguistic at all. However, that does not mean that they have not started the process of language acquisition. So we know that babies as young as 1 month, they already can identify the voice of the mother versus other people. The voice of the father comes later, but they can listen focused enough and have the memory and the ability to discriminate between the voice of their own mother or their main caretaker. It doesn't have to be the mother, but mostly it's the mother because it's the one that they have heard from even within the wound. So they can identify that versus other people. And also, most remarkable, they can categorize sounds into linguistic categories, which is something very, very remarkable. So they can tell the difference between ba and pa of all languages. So if you remember the phonological inventory of the language, they cannot quite specify which phonological inventory is relevant for a particular language, but they kind of can identify the possible linguistic sounds. And at that moment, they don't discriminate between one language or another because how could they? I mean, that would not be productive, because imagine that they make a mistake in discriminating whether a particular differentiation between phonetic differentiation is relevant or not in their language. So at that moment, they're open to whatever language is in their environment, but they can also start being able to categorizing sounds, okay? And they also can recognize the first linguistic sounds, which is pretty much the same as I've told you before, okay? So now we go into 6 months, and by age 6 months, there's not much difference on what they can produce, but now they can tell apart the sounds of their own language or languages, the languages in their environment, apart from foreign sounds, meaning the languages that are not part of the linguistic environment, even when they are spoken by the same person. So it is incredible that at the age 6 months, they can already tell their language or the languages that they are going to focus their energy in acquiring from languages that will be irrelevant, that however might appear occasionally in their environment through a visitor or a recording or with visual input. But they can already tell what is the language that they're going to focus on, or languages that they're focused on, and the sounds that are going to be ignored by the minds. Okay, by 7 months is then, once they have done that, they start with what we call they start producing what we call reduplicative babbling, either spoken or signed. Deaf babies that are exposed to sign language, they also start having this kind of babbling at 7 months with their hands instead of with their mouths, so to speak. Okay, so babbling appears at 7 months. Babbling is this repetitive producing of one syllable, we could say. So it would be like ba 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 ba, or ga 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 ga, typically, or pa 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 pa. And then that's at 7 months. And of course, if they reduplicate mama mama ma, then you think that they have produced the word mama or mom, which is one of the first words that they produce or you identify on them, or pa 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 pa. It's not clear that they refer to the father or the mother at that point, but at least the sound is being produced, and it's not a coincidence that in a lot of languages that is what we decide for the word of mom or dad, because that's what we want the children, our own children, to say first, to give us the salience that we deserve as parents. So that's at 7 months, babbling, okay, spoken or signed. Now, by the time they are 10 or 11 months, so just before, a little before their first birthday, they can recognize what is a possible syllable onset or coda of their language. So if, for example, if they are acquiring something like English, they know that tr, like in trip or truck, they know that tr is a good starting for a syllable onset for a word, if you want, or for any syllable inside a word. But they know that rt, for example, is not a good starting of a word. They cannot say the words with those syllables yet, they cannot produce them, but they can recognize what is a good starting of a syllable versus a bad starting of a syllable. Okay, and also around their first birthday, that's when they produce the first words. Now, at 18 months, so a year and a half, there is what we call the word explosion, in which they, as we will see later, they start producing a lot of words and recognizing even more. And they also, at a year and a half, they start what we call the two-word stage or telegraphic speech. So they produce things like mommy juice or baby fall down being one word. Or Sandra water. Okay, so those they can put two words together, no more than two. Don't get confused by the baby fall down, even though it's written in three parts. Those are two words. Baby is one, and fall down is another one. It's just that in adult writing system, we write it separately. Okay, so that is the moment of telegraphic speech, and that goes for about half a year or a year or a little more until 2.5 years to 3 years of age, and around that moment, around the third birthday or a little before the third birthday, they have what we call the syntactic explosion, which means that they don't do telegraphic speech by putting two words together anymore. It's not that then they put three words together and the fourth words together, like if it were a Lego game. No, they go from two words together to many words together, meaning they kind of something clicks in their head, in which they find out some basic syntactic rules in their language, and then they're able to make a sentence with a few words, maybe not 25 words, but they don't go from 2 to 3 words. They go from 2 words to many words with a structure that you can recognize. Okay, and then from then on until 4 or 5 years, even up to 7 years, in most cases, and in certain aspects of the grammar, they fine-tune their phonological, morphological, and syntactic and semantic rules. There's a refining of those, and I'm talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age. They are still polishing their grammar, so it takes them that long to have what we identify as the adult shape of the grammar, more or less. Okay, so up to 7 years, we can say then that up to 4, 5, 6, 7 years, children have an accent because they have a phonology that is specific for the age and is different from the one that they will have later on. And then until about 17 years or so, there's still a rapid vocabulary increase, as we will see later. And then after that, things slow down a little. They get consolidated, and probably most people don't pay attention to the language development that much. I mean, still changes throughout life, but not in this very clear schedule way that you have before that. Okay, so about the schedule. What is the schedule of language acquisition? I'm going to present you here a few notes about the phonology acquisition, the acquisition of the lexicon and development of the lexicon, syntax and pragmatics in general. Okay, so let's start with the phonology. I already told you the first word appears at around 12 months of age. The first word that they utter, they can recognize words before that. But by the time the baby turns 1, and it's by the time that the baby is also most likely, if they haven't started yet, is when they are starting to walk. They also utter the first word, which does not include, of course, that mama, papa, that is very similar to babbling. Now, I told you already, and I can't emphasize this enough, that they keep refining their sounds, the sounds of their languages and their prosody, knowing whether they're asking a question or making a statement or giving an order or a request or something like that, until they are 4 and 5 years of age. So even though at 5 years of age you can understand children very well, many of them have not refined their sounds, and there is no need to bring them to a language pathologist or a logopedist necessarily, because it's a normal part of development until age 5, even 7, in many cases, that they might have some refining in their sound inventory. There are some parts of the phonology that children consistently encounter difficulties with in their own language. So, for example, typically there is this universal phenomenon of devoicing final consonants. So children might say back instead of bag, or dog instead of dog. And that is quite universal, devoicing final consonants. Some languages actually have the systematic devoicing of final consonants, such as German, for example, or Catalan. But for many languages like English that allow voiced consonants at the end of a word, still English children, meaning children trying to acquire English, they might still go through a stage in which they are devoicing those consonants that later on they voice. Now, the same for uttering stops for fricatives. It's also kind of a universal a universal feature that children would say T for C. And for example, imagine Spanish that has the word for yes is C, and many children say T instead of C. And that is not something specific of Spanish children. It's just very salient because they happen to have a very salient word that uses a fricative. But uttering a stop when they mean a fricative is something very universal. It's a specific part of the sound system that children universally find especially difficult. The same for consonant clusters. They have a tendency to reduce the cluster of consonants in a single syllable. So they would say problem instead of problem, just because pr and bl, they find that more difficult to pronounce than the simplification. These might be also strategies for overcoming memory failures. They don't quite remember whether it was problem or problem or problem or something, and they just might utter out of memory, and they in a general shape of the word. So it might be just a matter with the memory of the word itself, or it might be really something with the fine motor skills of consonant clusters. We are not clear on that. But universally, these devoicing fricative or stops versus in place of fricatives and reduce the reducing of consonant clusters, that's pretty universal. Okay, now let me tell you a couple of things about the lexicon development of children. So by the age 12 or 12 months, sometimes as earlier as 10 and sometimes a little later, the child produces the first words. What do the first words look like? So as I say, these mama, papa, dada, words that are so similar to babbling that we are not clear whether to consider them as first words or not, but otherwise they have words for objects that they might encounter, such as car, for example. I mean, it's easy that there will be a car toy, or that they would go on a car, etc., right? And then there would be names for not concrete, for not countable substances, such as water, that they, you can think also they encounter quite a bit, but also it's not the same to have a word for an object that you can touch and you can delimit very well, than to have a word for an object such as water. That is much more confusing because they don't encounter water. They encounter either a pool of water, or they encounter a glass of water or something like that, but still they produce the word water for the substance, so to speak. Huh? Then they have words for verbs and actions, such as give, for example, or drink, or eat, and those would be verbs. Yeah, and then they have some adjectives, such as big or red, for colors or something like that. And they have also words for what we say pragmatic functions, say, such as saying hi, or saying no, or saying yes. Actually, they say no much more than they say yes, even though negation is a very complex a complex system, but still they say the word no to express their feelings. And so those are the kind of words that they have, as you see, from concrete objects to pragmatic words. And they say all of those, they're able to say all of those to different variety up to around their first birthday. Okay, so then at 16 months, they can recognize 191 words while they only produce 64. Okay, so remember that that paradox about what we can learn versus what the reality is, right? If we only take the words that they produce, we would say, oh, they know about 64 words. This is a mean, of course. But actually, if you do experimental designs in which you target recognition, not only look at production, then you will see that children are able to store. They already have 191 words. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to understand what kind of data you are taking as your foundation for your claims. Okay, so by the age of 13 months, they can produce 534 words, and we kind of stopped counting about how many they can recognize because the production is just so spectacular, and that's the moment, remember, when they also start with their syntactic explosion. Okay, so there is a vocabulary burst in the second year, and they go from 64 months to in another 64 to 64 words in when they are 16 months, to in another 16 months or a little less, they go to 534 words, and we call that the vocabulary burst. So in your observations in the child's database, you tell me whether that child you think has gone through this vocabulary burst if they are beyond second year, for example. That would be, that would be a kind of observation. It would also be a good observation in your homework if you say, well, I can observe that this child is already producing words, and those are concrete objects, or I see verbs already, or I see pragmatic words already, right? So this is the kind of observations that I expect you to point out in your homework. Now, let me just give you a couple more, if you want, random data, and is that in preschool, so before 6 years of age, the child is acquiring 10 words per day. That means about one word per waking hour. Of course, well, they're sleeping, they don't acquire anything. So this toddler that you just have there and that you think that they are just, playing with the little cars or with the tea sets or something, they are actually acquiring one new word per waking hour. So they're working all the time. That continues until age 17, in which they acquire not 10 words per day anymore because they're acquiring many other concepts, for example, but 5 words per day. That's still a lot. I wish I could acquire five words per day in any language that I would target for myself, right? But that doesn't go like that. After age 17, things slow down a little bit, probably because your life gets extremely complicated. But that means that the average high school student, which is up to age 17, knows about 60,000 non-derived words, meaning stems, if you want. Okay, 60,000. Now, adults, no, by age 17, sorry, we know approximately 80,000 words by age 17. Okay. A literate adult knows about 120,000 words, including names for places and people and so forth. That's a lot of words. So that would be a literate adult, 120,000 words. And of course, the issue is people who speak many languages, do they double that number, or do they distribute those 120,000 words into their different languages? And that's something that we will approach later. Okay, this is humans. We know that animals are able to learn words too. That's not something that only humans can do. Words as for associations of sound and meaning. If you have taken the Introduction to Linguistics 1 class with me, I have introduced to you to Chaser, the border collie. She can identify and select about 1,000 words. That is quite a bit for a dog, especially those of us who have a dog, and I feel so proud that they can identify the word for walk or the word for cookie, right? So we are underestimating them grossly because dogs are able to identify at least 1,000 words. Of course, that's far from the 120,000 that we use, but we're talking about our language, after all, a human language. I don't know how many words or units of dog communication a regular person can recognize. So that's quite remarkable that dogs can recognize so much of our language, and that means of this synchrony that we have, this synchrony, this coevolution history that we have, humans and dogs, that we share. Yeah, and the same for Alex the parrot. If you remember, Alex the parrot was able to identify a huge number of words referring to objects and properties and quantities and so forth, and that is quite remarkable. As I say, far from the 120,000 words, but again, we're talking about our language, and these are different species that would not necessarily have to identify any of our linguistic objects the same way that we don't necessarily know anything about their own, but they're able to learn all of these words. Okay. Now, what are some idiosyncrasies of early words? The first one, the first property of early words is overextension, and I invite you to click later on at that cute clip that I include there. What is overextension? Overextension is when you take a word and then you can apply it to the different objects that adults also subsume under that word, no matter how different those are. So even though a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are very different animals, perceptually speaking, very different objects, the children learn that both of them are under the label dog. A Chihuahua is a dog, regardless of what you might think, and a Great Dane is also a dog. right? So once children see that words have that ability, they have the ability to select some properties of objects and ignore others, and apply to those objects according to those properties, they do something which is very logical to do, which is they extend that label to other objects that also have properties that are similar. So since a squirrel is not so different from a chihuahua, after all, and it's certainly more similar to a chihuahua than it is to a Great Dane, a child might also call a squirrel a dog, especially if they haven't learned any different label for squirrel. They will also do that to deer because, again, a deer is similar to a Great Dane to a certain extent. It behaves similarly and it looks similar to a Great Dane. So they would say that that's also a dog until they learn that that specific one has a different label. And they will do that for a horse too. So it looks like they call dog to any moving four-legged creature, even if it climbs up a tree. But what they are doing is just they are extending what they have learned to do when they were confronted with how to label a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. Okay, that's hardly surprising since many times those animals would have more in common with other animals that they learn to denominate by other labels than to among themselves, right? So a Great Dane and a Shetland pony is more similar than a Great Dane and a Chihuahua, and a squirrel and a Chihuahua is more similar than a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, and a Great Dane and a deer. They look much more similar than a Great Dane and a Chihuahua. So why you we partition the Chihuahua and the Great Dane together and excluding the pony and the squirrel and the deer? That's something that children have to catch up with, right? That is not very different from what we might encounter as adults. If you have to convince people who have not taken any class in biology and know that dolphins have lungs and sharks have gills, so then they would think that sharks and dolphins are both fish that have a lot in common and they are related to each other. The same way that an eel and a snake, they might be, instead of being a fish and a reptile, they might be the same animal. Or when they encounter then something like a platypus, they also might be completely lost. Actually, that happened in history when the first explorers went to Australia, where platypuses live, and they encountered them and they couldn't classify them as any kind of animal because not only their bizarre shape, but also they lay an egg, but they are also marsupials. And so it's very difficult to classify, and actually those first explorers they were accused of fraud they were accused of having taken different parts of different animals and sewed them together for the sake of making a splash in the biological world. And it was only when they could actually bring a live specimen of a platypus that it was believed in Europe that platypuses exist. And the same, I could go on with other examples. Is a penguin clearly a bird, really? And how about a seahorse? It's hard to accept that a seahorse is a fish when it does not look anything like a fish. And in my class, we already saw the magpies. It's hard to accept that magpies, who are fish, since they can breathe air, or so it looks like, as we learned, they look more like amphibians when they are actually fish. And if you are still not convinced, I can give you just this insect, and you tell me whether you think there is a kind of ant, a kind of wasp, a kind of beetle, or what kind of animal that is. So that is what children encounter. They find new items, and then they have to decide whether a particular label, dog, applies to them or not. And they are under pressure to communicate, right? So they see a squirrel and they say, "Look, mommy, a dog." And it's not that they are confused, it's just that they are taking the same gamble that we take in all these examples as adults. So my point is that children are not suffering from a conceptual confusion about biological taxonomies, but they are being resourceful in extending a limited system beyond its apparent limits. So they are making the most of what they have. If they have one word for a particular kind of object in the world, they are making the most out of this world. Is not of this word. It's not that they are confused about the properties of a horse versus a chihuahua. It's just that they are solving the problem of naming objects in this world. That's it. This is actually responding to a very useful and powerful cognitive ability that humans have, which is to draw analogies. So analogies are related to overextensions because overextensions occur when two concepts or objects that share some perceptual or functional feature are put in the same category. That's making an analogy. You make an analogy, and then if you are, you don't realize that there's actually a different word for that particular object, you are accused of having incurred into an overextension of the meaning of that word when you have just applied the general concept, cognitive ability of making analogies. When I was an undergrad, I actually participated in an experiment in which we would take unusual objects and we'll present them to people who would not recognize them as anything, and we would tell them, we will ask them to tell us what label they think that that object was, whether it was something for, it was a mashed potato maker, or it was a can opener or something like that. And people would just apply labels to those objects a little bit randomly, because they would think, oh yeah, this is a can opener, for example, because they wouldn't realize that it was actually a spaghetti roller, like the one in the middle, right? And then they would make exactly the same overextensions by using the analogical thinking that children and toddlers do when they acquire language. Okay, so in short, overextension is more likely evidence of strategic use of language than it is of children's semantic or conceptual incompetence. So it's not that children are not being smart or are conceptually confused or are not able to see differences in the world. It's just they are applying analogy, and sometimes they do it in a way that we accept, like calling Chihuahuas and Great Danes dogs, and sometimes they are incurring what we will classify from the adult perspective as an overextension, because they don't realize that those objects that they are observing don't belong to the same category. Okay, so the next section will be about syntactic development. And that I'm including also morphological development, because this is already the rules. These are already structural rules. Phonology also has rules, of course, but it is a completely different grammatical object, as you hopefully have learned in the Intro to Linguistics 1 class. Okay, so how about the morphology? So morphemes, for example, of plural, progressive articles, I'm going to put it with morphemes here, are acquired in a regular, stable order across differences in input, rates of learning, and cognitive abilities. So children, they all acquire the different morphemes, the different categories according to a schedule, and that is actually wouldn't have to be the case. I mean, a child might acquire the plural morpheme before the gender morpheme or something like that. But apparently there is kind of a progression there that we don't quite understand why, but there is one. So as for syntax specifically, I told you already, children go from uttering one word to uttering two words and then many. Right? So they don't go from one and then two and then three and then four. No, they go from one to putting two together, and then they're able to utter sentences. Okay? So when they do other sentences, that's at the beginning of the third year, and that's what we call the syntactic explosion, so to speak. Okay, and that is another thing that you can point out in your homework, for example, which is whether if they are beyond 3 years, whether you can see already that the syntactic explosion, so to speak, has already happened in that child, or if they are beyond 3 years, and then you say, well, but I can only see 2 words in the utterances, so according to this data, this child is stuck in the 2-word stage or something like that. Okay, so just giving you some pointers. So in the third year, when they undergo the syntactic explosion, the same way that I talked to you about overextension when it came to the meanings of words, which, by the way, you can also point that out in your homework. So the same way that they do overextension regarding the meaning of words, they have what is called syntactic overextension, which is things like that. So they have here I give you an example with morphological overextension. Wherever you have went in the adult speak, children might actually produce goad. So they would say, I goed to the movies yesterday, instead of I went to the movies yesterday. Okay, what they are doing here is they're overextending the rule for formation of past tense in English to a verb that actually happens to have an irregular form to express the past tense, but they might not remember the irregular form, which is an exception, so they apply the rule that they apply for the other words. So since you have work in the present and worked in the present, or walk in the present and walked in the past, then you might have go in the present and then goed in the past. It just makes sense that it should be like that. And it's only later on that they say, oh no, but go is an exception in the past and is went instead of goed, which is what would make sense. Okay, that's called the overextension of a morphological rule. Yeah, so they have others that are overextensions of syntactic rules. So instead of saying you make me sad, they may say you sad me, meaning you make me sad. And then you're like, huh, why are they saying that? Well, they're saying that because they are overextending from something they might have heard, which is from I am angry, or you are angry, or I make you angry, so you anger me. Okay, if you can say you anger me from angry, why can't you say you sad me from sad? There is in principle no reason for it. I mean, there is a syntactic, a deep linguistic reason for it, but they might not know that deep linguistic reason for it. So they just say you sad me, the same way that adults say you anger me. Okay, so they're overextending something that is applicable to the adjective anger. Why is angry? So why is not applied to sad? Yeah. The same with something like who killed my kitty cat. Instead of saying that, which is an adult sentence, they say who deaded my kitty cat. And they say that but because if they can say who cleaned my kitty cat from clean, made my kitty cat clean, so who made my kitty cat clean. If you want to say who made my kitty cat dead, if you can say who cleaned my kitty cat, why couldn't you say who deaded my kitty cat? Okay, just because from dead you cannot get a verb, but for clean you can get a verb. So what they are doing is they're overextending a rule that otherwise applies to an adjective in English, and they may have heard that sentence. Yeah. The same with causative. So don't make me giggle is what is the adult form of the child form. Don't giggle me. Don't giggle me is the cute way in which children say don't make me giggle, the same way that say don't, that they might have heard don't move me, don't make me move, right? So don't make me giggle. But with move, you can say don't move me. And with giggle, you cannot say in adult language, giggle me, but you have to say don't make me giggle with a analytic causative, right? So the point of this, if you think a little bit on these examples, the point of it is that children might use evidence that they have for one element of the system to make overextensions of a rule, applying that to an element of the system that might be exempt from that rule. That's an overextension. And they do it in the lexicon with meanings of words. They do it in morphology with morphological shapes of words. And they do it in syntax with syntactic structures. Yeah. And the last point of it will be the pragmatic development of children. The first thing that they learn, even before they utter words and even before they really can have conversations, the first thing that they learn about conversation is that we structure conversations in a turn-taking way. And again, I invite you, as soon as I stop my video after this slide, I invite you to click on that cute video to see two babies that are basically not speaking yet, so to speak, because they are not producing words yet, but they have the turn taking very much down. So that's very cute. So turn taking is a pragmatic ability that is first acquired, and then when they are already able to talk and to say something, they learn something that pragmatically is very salient, which is to remain on topic. That we talk about something, and then the next utterance has to refer to that something and not change the topic. That is just one of those Gricean rules of pragmatics. And the other thing that they learn is this communicative intent. They learn that humans, when they say something, they have the intent to communicate. Here that I put it here as something that they kind of develop. I mean, for Tomasello and his group, this is actually a point of departure. So this is nothing that they acquire, this is nothing that they learn, but this is a point of departure which is crucial for language acquisition. So at any rate, they acquire that ability early. Then they acquire the rules of politeness, being able to respond in the same intensity, being able to respect when the other person is talking is a little bit related to turn taking and so on. And the last one is they learn the last thing that is acquired, pragmatically speaking, is the discourse markers, which kind of tie the discourse together. Words like because and then, those kind of make a discourse, make an utterance whole. They make it consistent, and they relate one idea with the others, with the other ideas, and then those structure the utterances. And those are the last ones to be acquired. The same way as diacritics that anchor what you are saying to the present or the past reality. Words like here, I, pronoun I, no, now, those are very hard to acquire. It's hard to understand that I refers to the speaker. It doesn't refer to a particular person. That's why many times children, for example, they start talking about Johnny water, meaning Johnny wants water, or Johnny is in the water, or whatever it is. But they don't say I water, because they have not quite yet grasped that there is a pronoun that does that for you, that you don't have to say your name all the time. you can just use a pronoun. Okay, so this is roughly a schedule of language acquisition. And I'm going to stop the video here so that you can click on all these cute little links that I included to you here, and we go to the next video.